Welcome to Remote First Innovators, the podcast for leaders who are scaling companies built for the modern world. We sit down with founders and experts in distributed work to explore how they've broken down barriers and solved the real-world challenges of growing and running remote teams. Each episode dives into practical strategies for onboarding, IT, security, compliance, and everything it takes to build a thriving distributed business. No fluff, no theory, just what works when your team is everywhere and operations never stop. Here are your hosts, Robert Phelps and Jake Gump.
Welcome to another Remote First Innovators podcast. Today's guest is a fractional HR leader, culture strategist, author, and founder of the Badass HR Hub. She serves small and mid-sized companies across the Carolinas, helping them to strengthen culture, navigate compliance, onboard and offboard remote staff, and build better leadership habits. Today, we're talking about a topic almost every remote or hybrid company struggles with. How do you build a thriving remote culture where people feel connected, engaged, accountable, even when you never see them in person? Leslie, welcome to Remote First Innovators.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks for having me.
Let's dive right in to start with here. You know, when you picture a truly thriving remote work culture, what does that actually look like?
I think it is a culture where people are communicating, they're connecting on a regular basis, people are engaged in their work, regardless of whether they're present in a particular workspace.
And why do you think some organizations, they really flourish in remote or hybrid environments, while, you know, others, it kind of feels like the wheels are just falling off?
Yeah, I think the ones that flourish really have a plan for making it work. The others perhaps just kind of stick with what they did before they were remote or hybrid, and it really is different. And you have to have plans and different systems and initiatives in order to make it work. And I'm sure we'll talk through some of those.
Yeah, I always hear a lot of myths around remote culture, and, you know, people won't work unless I can see them, or remote means disconnected, or, you know, culture just can't really exist without an office.
Mm-hmm.
What's, you know, before we go deeper, what's the mindset that leaders need to make from going from in-office management to remote leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one that I hear is the first one that you mentioned. If I can't see people, they're not working. So I think a big mindset shift is moving from actually feeling like you're monitoring people because you're on site with them to providing clear expectations and goals, and really basing performance more on outcomes than on the process of getting to the outcome.
Yeah, I feel like people, they will get their job done. Majority. I mean, you always have the 10%,
Yeah,
I feel like,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
But majority will, if you give them what they need to be getting done, they're going to get it done regardless. Doesn't matter, even if it doesn't take 9 to 5.
Yes.
I feel like that they're, especially in a remote environment, people have lives. I think there's a reason why people like remote work from that perspective. But let's talk about leadership for a minute, and you know, how do great remote leaders build trust when they can't physically see their employees every day?
Yeah, I will say it's probably a little more difficult than building trust and environment with where you are present with someone. But I think it's a lot of the same things. I mean, acting with integrity, showing the person that you respect them, leading with some humility, and extending trust to others. So those are some of the things that I talk about just in general with building trust. When you have remote employees, I think you have to have intentional times that you're connecting with them. So having one-on-ones, at least on a biweekly basis, is even more important than if you're on site. And I think just, you know, intentionally engaging, taking some time to really just kind of check in. How are you doing personally? Those kind of things are more important than even being physically there with someone and establishing the relationship and trust.
Can't agree more. I know in our organization, I'm talking to my sales guys all during the day. Shout out to Rome. We're able to see who's in office and, be able to pop in real quick and, take a 15 minutes and just chat, just as if you were coming down through the office, which is kind of cool. But you work with a lot of small companies, and 10 employees, 150 employees. What expectations do they need to clarify early, in regards to communication and availability and response times?
Yeah, I think it's important, particularly in remote and hybrid, to have clear expectations. So, clarity around communication, expectations, what you want the person to achieve. I think that you definitely need to have kind of some standards around availability, response time, things like that are extremely important. And just kind of, making sure that you don't have people that are working around the clock because it's easy to do when you work remote. I work remote currently. Of course, I'm the only person in my firm unless I have a subcontractor or something. But I have a tendency to work a lot. So I may take a break during the day, but I work some at night and I probably end up working, close to 60 hours a week. But I'm also at a point in my life and it's my own company where that's okay.
Right.
For your average employee, especially if they have small kids at home and things like that, they are going to burn out quickly if they're doing that kind of thing. So it's important to kind of stay on top of those kind of things. And I think I deviated from your initial question to some
Yeah,
other things, but
no worries.
we were probably going to get into those anyway, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I can speak for all the dads and mothers out there that there's usually a pocket right after I get the kids in bed that I can get some stuff done.
Uh-huh.
That I kind of feel like, man, I need to get this done and ready for tomorrow. And it's kind of peace, Nobody's bothering me, during the day, and it's kind of there's a little bit of flexibility. Nice having my setup at home where I can pop in and I can get some stuff done and get ready for the next day. So I do enjoy that. I feel like there's for leaders sometimes they unintentionally create confusion or misalignment for remote teams in the regard of like, is there clear expectations or is it micromanaging? And what's your thoughts on that in regards to just, hey, when does it kind of come off as micromanaging, or when is too much too much?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I see, and this is for any organization, is that leaders oftentimes don't get enough training in leadership type things like delegation. So I think that it's important to do that, number one. The other thing that's important is to have those regular check-ins. And when you have that, you don't have to follow up all the time to say, how are you doing with this or that? You can kind of hold it for when your meeting is scheduled. The other thing is, I think just having some trust that most people truly do want to do a good job if they have clear expectations and know what their roles and responsibilities are. So, trusting your employees until they give you a good reason not to. And then, setting some clear expectations to make sure there's not a miscommunication there. One of the things that I've always liked is having kind of 90-day goals and expectations that are written that you can actually go back to in each one-on-one meeting, and also has deadlines. So you can say things like, we have a deadline next month for XYZ. How are things going? How do you need me to support you to achieve that goal? I think those kind of things are important.
Do you feel like that it's, I would say, not, and I'm speaking more for the IT business, realm right now, but I know things can change weekly, whether that be challenges, whether that be just things that pop up. And, do you find that the 90-day goals are, there's usually enough padding in there to where it doesn't matter what's going on, or do you find that you have multiple goals? Is it kind of like hey, a weekly, a monthly, 90 days, or is it just, we got 90 days to get this done? What's up, kind of dive a
Yeah.
little bit deeper if you don't mind.
I would say the 90-day goals are the bigger things that you want to achieve, and you do have to understand that they may be a little bit fluid, and that's something that you could adjust in your one-on-one meetings. And then there's the tasks that are a part of your job, right? So I
Right.
think that's a bit of a different thing, and those have to be they don't necessarily have to be monitored if you're doing your job, but there may need to be some discussion about those as well. One of the things that I really like, and this is for remote and not remote culture, is occasionally having a roles and responsibilities conversation at least once a year to kind of go through things like the job description, which I know seems like a very boring concept, but it's important and it's foundational for a lot of people strategies. So actually going through that with the individual, talking about kind of clarity around expectations and things like that. And then from there, setting those 90-day goals, but realizing that they may change some along the way. And of course, deadlines may change along the way, and that you'll discuss those things as they come.
And I'm glad you said that because I feel like I talk to a lot of business owners and people inside small businesses that they do such a good job that they start getting additional responsibility. So it's kind of twofold. The owner feels good enough to start giving you more responsibility, or the leader.
Mhm.
But then your role changes, and you're all of a sudden you're doing maybe two persons jobs, and especially in small business where maybe
Mhm.
50 or 75 and under, you're wearing multiple hats. It's not oftentimes that I talk to operations that are doing HR responsibilities or CFOs who are top of IT. And so there's kind of this wearing multiple hats. We like to say that all the time in creative IT, that we're taking off hats.
Mhm.
And so I really like the fact that you mentioned let's have that conversation. I feel like that's kind of that's missed. And,
Mhm.
from the employee's perspective, it's like, hey, do I get more compensation? Right. Or the
Right.
leader's perspective is like, man, I trust you so much and I'm going to give you more. And,
Mhm.
and, is there you don't want so much on the employee to where they, start checking out, they get burnt out, and then,
Mhm.
you don't want them to start failing those 90-day goals. Right. And so
Yes.
how do you balance that out?
Yeah, that is a great point, Jake, and I've seen that so many times, and I've been there where as people left or as additional initiatives came into play, they were shifted to me, or I've seen them shifted to others, where you end up doing actually several jobs. So I think having that roles and responsibilities conversation kind of sheds some light on where that may have become too much. But I think the other thing is that managers need to really be aware of that tendency and check in with employees regularly and just kind of ask, how's your workload? How do I need to support you? Because you don't want to lose one of your top performers because you trust them and you have shifted too much onto their plate.
I feel like there's a lot of employees. I'm trying to speak for some of these employees
Mhm.
out here that they would rather not say much. That they don't want to feel like that.
Mhm.
But I think there is a period in time where it's just kind of like, man, I am drowning here. And
Yeah.
a lot of times people, I think that's when they step in and they like, we may need to think about hiring somebody to help us out here. But how do they have the confidence to come to their leader and say,
Mhm.
I need some help?
Yeah, I mean, that is part of really developing that trusting relationship. And I think the leader asking some specific questions is going to make the employee feel more comfortable on a regular basis. So, in every one on one, asking how you're doing personally, how can I better support you? Maybe asking some questions around how are you feeling about your workload. I think if you do that on a consistent basis, people are going to become more comfortable with answering those questions and sharing. And if you show that you care as a leader by showing empathy and letting people know you appreciate them and communicating with people, asking their opinion, you're going to kind of create that environment where people just feel safe to do that.
Yeah, there's a common theme here that it's great communication, right? and it's inside the remote team, and you kind of get a rhythm. I can tell you inside Creative IT, we get a rhythm with the standard communication. There's a transparency that's expected. There's a consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And, whenever we had talked before, you had mentioned that, the one-on-ones are just, they're so important remotely. And you were kind of giving us an idea of what that looks like. But when does teams, get overloaded with the meetings, and, how do we keep them from, getting meeting fatigue or burning them out, with those items? Because I feel like that comes up a lot. And, you hear Elon Musk talking about, well, if I'm not, or even Amazon, where they're like, hey, if we're not gonna, we're just gonna do everybody a favor, and if I'm not, giving anything to this meeting, I'm heading out.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And it is so easy to disengage on Zoom meetings. So I think having some criteria of when a meeting is needed and when it's not is important. If it's just a one-way communication where the leader is sharing what's going on or something like that, that you probably heard that meeting could have been a memo. I could do a training on leading meetings, which kind of talks through that. But I think with people that are working remotely, that you do have to be intentional. You may be in a few more meetings than if you're on site because you don't have those casual opportunities to interact. However, you certainly don't want overkill, and you want people to have time to do their job. So I think, I mentioned the one-on-ones. I think they're important. I think it's probably important to have some kind of a staff touch base, maybe once a week if everybody's working remote. Maybe a monthly team connection time that's not a meeting, that just gives folks an opportunity to connect, kind of like a water cooler conversation, or maybe even, having employees pairing them up with another team member to have a conversation and maybe have some prompts to build that relationship. Because of course the relationship with the leader is important, but you also want team members to work well together. And in order to do that, if you have a personal relationship with other people, you tend to be more comfortable and work better as a team.
So, we're talking right now about leaders and, making sure that the remote employees, they're not left out of the important conversations or the decisions. Do you have an example of a company that improved communication dramatically with just one change?
That's a great question. I would say one that comes to mind, and this is a little more than one change, but we were talking about the meetings. One company that I work with really was intentional and streamlined the meetings that they were having, and I think that made a huge difference. So they weren't doing consistent one-on-ones, and they were having staff meetings probably way too much, where everybody was involved and it wasn't value added. So they, throw out a prompt. Who do you want to call out today? Nobody would say anything. What suggestions do you have? Nobody would say anything because it was too big a group and it was just too frequent. So I think just kind of fine tuning and making those things more intentional can make a big difference.
So we have the communication covered, and then we start getting into, setting the goals, and then we talk about performance and accountability. And just because they're remote, do you feel like that companies should rethink performance management in the remote world? What does a healthy, healthy performance goal look like, and accountability in this world of remote work?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think virtually everybody needs to rethink performance management. I don't know many companies that are doing it well, and this is actually one of the solutions that I offer. There are so many companies that are still doing the annual performance review with ratings, and most people are just hate it. Managers hate it. Employees hate it. It's not frequent enough. It's reflecting on the past rather than being forward thinking. So I will say that the approach that I recommend for anybody is pretty consistent with what I would recommend with remote, which is doing the more frequent less formal conversations. So performance conversations is actually what I call it. I have a toolkit that's free on my website because I'm kind of passionate about this topic. So if anybody wants to check it out, influencehrconsulting.com under resources. But it really is just more of a structured one-on-one, really. I don't love ratings because I think they are more about the rater than the person being rated. Um, but I do have kind of a recommended process for folks that want to include ratings where it's exceeds, meets, and does not meet. And you define each one of those levels. So if you had a certain component of a job, like, for example, customer service, you would define what exceeds looks like, share what meets looks like, and then do not meets is usually pretty easy. So yeah, I mean, I don't know that it is significantly different than what I would recommend for anybody, because I don't think that the approach most organizations use is that effective, in summary.
Yeah, I remember I had some sales jobs where I was leading and beating everybody by sales by a long shot, and they would give my performance, anything below, amazing, because I'm just crushing every goal. And I
Uh-huh.
think it doesn't matter who it is, everybody, you could ask everybody and nobody's going to give the same rating,
Mhm.
especially if you do like a
That's
number.
right. Yeah.
Everybody's going to have a different number in mind about what they're doing.
Mhm.
Man, I'm at least an 8 here. Come on. And so I
Yeah.
think there's good ways and bad ways to. I do feel like that it's kind of less friction if you say, "Hey, you're meeting it, you're doing it, good job,"
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's simple, rather than making it so paragraphs worth of stuff that it's just.
Mhm.
I mean, it's just is it garbage? Is it just repeated stuff?
Yeah.
And I've been in companies where it was smaller and larger, Fortune 500 companies where
Mhm.
they have to do it because they have to do it because this is and so I feel like that it's a great opportunity to really show the value to somebody in this one-to-one, right?
Yes.
Just tell them how important they are to make making the company go where our goal is, where we want to be. And
Mhm.
so I
It is a missed opportunity for many. The other part of it is that managers oftentimes don't know how to execute a performance conversation that well. And a lot of organizations don't really provide training. So it ends up being the manager talking at the employee where it really should be a two-way conversation. And the employee should be talking more than the manager. So anyhow, my thoughts on performance reviews. Probably
well,
sorry you asked that
no,
question.
no, that's right. I mean, I do think it's a very important thing, and I think that I can think of personally where I just felt like that I wasn't connected to management, because
Mhm,
of the review, and they
mhm,
didn't truly value anything I was doing. I was just meeting goals, and there was nothing else. There was no really. I've had several awesome managers in my career, but sometimes
mhm.
you get the ones where you're not connected to them, and it makes you want to start looking for other
Oh, yeah.
opportunities.
Yeah.
And I can think of several that I mean I'd never leave because unless this manager leaves, and you always hear that too. People are
Mhm,
like, if this person ever leaves, I'm out. And I think it's a difference between a great manager and a good manager. And I do find that
mhm,
the good managers will maybe make the interview that process interview any process they're on interview. Maybe
mhm.
they're doing your reviews. They make the process their own, right? and
Yes.
and they really individualize it, and they try to deliver it in a way that uh, they know that their employees going to handle it, and
Mhm.
they're just experts in that. And I can tell you that was a big game changer for me because there was several performance reviews. We really weren't talking too much about performance because I had that down. It was other key character values that I needed to learn to take my game to the next level
Mhm.
as a leader. And so I'm just glad you talked about that. And I do feel like that especially in small businesses, some don't even take the time to do the review, right? And it's
Oh,
very,
yeah.
very important.
Yeah. I see that very often.
So if you were We were talking, you were talking about some of your, obviously you have that resource. But if you were helping a founder write a success metric for remote roles,
Hmm.
what would you tell them to focus on?
So it's going to vary depending on the role, but I would tell them to focus on outcomes rather than the tactics to get there. So, what do you really want this role to achieve? And make sure that those are clear and clearly communicated.
We were talking, I was mentioning just a minute ago, like people just start looking, right? The term quiet quitting, I've been seeing that on social media all the time now. Uh,
Hmm.
they they tend to surface more, seems like to me, in remote teams. What early warning signs would you say that leaders need to start looking for
Hmm.
to make sure that their team isn't quiet quitting?
Okay, yeah, that's great. I'm glad that you brought that up. I have written several blog posts and things about quiet quitting, and there's a new thing called quiet cracking, which essentially is the early stages of burnout. So the person's performing their job, but they are quietly losing it under the pressure. So quiet quitting, I think, what you look for is maybe somebody who seemed to be more engaged in meetings, was doing a really good job meeting their objectives. And you notice that they start to pull back, that they're not as interactive, that maybe they're not as available, even if it's remote. Maybe they are not performing as well. um, those are kind of cues. They're not engaging with their other team members. If there are things that you're doing as a group, maybe it's an after hours happy hour or something like that. They're not participating in those things where they once did. I think those are all cues.
In your culture work, how do you help leaders define culture in a way that it still works for remote teams?
Hmm. I think you have to redefine it a bit. So, some of the things that I've already talked about, I mean, I think the clarity, communication, and connection are important. Connection, I think, just intentionally figuring out how am I going to make sure that people feel like they're a part of of the team, that they belong, that they are connected to the purpose and feel like they're doing meaningful work. Just thinking through all of those things. And I think it's important, not sure if it goes here, but I'll go ahead and bring it up, to do occasional in person type activities. So maybe 90-day get togethers. And of course, it depends on your logistics. But, if you can do a 90-day, if not, if the most you can do is once a year, I think it is important to have some of that face time so that people really feel that sense of belonging. You can feel it remotely, um, with intention, but it's harder. And when you actually get together with people in person, it makes a big difference. I know I personally, since I work alone with my dogs currently, I feel connected with them. They're not very good employees, but uh, I'm in a networking group that's all virtual, and they're actually chapters across the country. And I went to their conference and met a lot of people that I had just met online outside of that. And it just made such a big difference in our relationship, just that one in person interaction. You felt like you knew them at another level. So just an example of why I think occasionally doing that is important.
Yeah, I know at Creative IT we have usually a couple team events, one in the spring, one in the fall, and it's a game changer. It allows a lot of times we try to get the families involved too, and it's just a good time to our team as our team gets bigger, and you get to a lot of times you're just taking care of business and moving on, right? You try to
Yeah.
connect as much as you can on a personal level, but it does take the connection to a different level, and I always enjoy those meetings with all my team members, and where you don't have to talk about what we're trying to do for and serve the other clients. We're just we're serving each other, we're hanging out with each other, and just having a moment to relax. So and I do know that there's bigger companies that do those destination getaways. I was joking with Robert. I was like, man, I hope we get to the point where we're making enough money to do those, because those are awesome.
Yeah.
Looks like so much fun in all these different places in the world. I will say that every leader that I've spoke with has just said that those destination events are just amazing. And then
Yeah, I've never been on one.
yeah,
I've worked with
I've
companies
always wanted to. You look at the pictures and you're like, wow, and then I talked to some other leaders who are like, man, if we can just go somewhere locally, and it makes a big difference. And I know that if there's any leaders listening, that if you take the time to get some people together, you're gonna get your money's worth. I haven't heard anybody yet say that it wasn't worthwhile. So, what are some other practical things that leaders can do to build connection and camaraderie and belonging across distance?
Okay. Yeah, I think sometimes using, even if they're silly icebreakers, as long as they're appropriate, you got your HR person here. Just opportunities for people to get to know each other personally a little bit better. One of the things that I really like is called the Working Genius Model and Assessment. It is a Patrick Lencioni tool, and it's kind of an assessment that shares how you work best. So there's 6 types of work. They're part of the assessment. 2 are your geniuses, which are really those areas where you feel joy and you feel in the flow when you're doing them. 2 in the middle, and 2 are your frustrations. You can actually overlay the team and have a discussion on how you can leverage the strengths within the team and how you can work around the weaknesses. And it gives you a better appreciation for others, because they're all important. And a lot of times we tend to judge others if they don't kind of work the same way we do. So for me, I'm all the implementation girl. So I don't spend a lot of time pondering or coming up with ideas. I'm boots on the ground, helping, pushing it over the finish line, where you've got people that are more in the space of being more strategic and pondering and coming up with ideas. And you need all of that within the team. And when you have that, information, it helps you to have more empathy and work better with others. So that's just one tool that I really like. Another one that I've seen a team use that I thought was kind of cool was having an employee information form that had things like, what kind of food you like, what's your favorite candy, what's your favorite animal, what authors do you like? It had like a whole series of questions, and they shared it on a common Google Drive, and they could use that to learn about each other and also to provide recognition and appreciation for others. So I thought that was a neat activity. The languages of appreciation at work is another tool that you can use that's pretty neat. It's kind of like the love languages, but targeted at the workplace.
I've read that book. It did change my world. Yeah. So that is, if anybody's listening, 5 love languages, trying to, have a good love life. I'll plug that one all day long, because that was huge to me. Because I had no idea that's what all those things were. And so I'm definitely I like presents. So, so Christmas is a good one for me. Love tank is full, right?
Okay, so you're the gifts.
Yeah.
All right. Mine is words of affirmation.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And that's the case with the love languages and the languages of appreciation at work. They're not always consistent, though, between the two, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Physical touch is one of the love languages at work. That's probably not the best one.
Yeah.
But you see less than 2% of the workplace. So
right.
You don't have to worry about that as much if people are remote.
Right. Exactly. I hear a lot of people talk about, like rituals, or, using a piece of software like Slack or Roam to create culture. A lot of people are big on like celebrations, and making sure that their birthdays are celebrated, and just different milestones like that. Is there any other ones that I could add to that list? there any rituals that you can, kind of think of that has been successful in a workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've brought up some good ones. I've heard stories where with remote workplaces, they would send people DoorDash people their favorite cupcake, or what are those buntlet cakes, things like that. I think it just really depends on the company and what kind of fits with the work culture. But I think, just, and I keep saying being intentionally building those moments that kind of make a difference to employees is important. And one of the things that I see companies not doing enough of is actually asking people what they want and for their feedback. So they try to guess, these are the things that we'll do to recognize employees, or these are the things that we'll do for well-being. And the easiest thing to do is just ask people what they think and what they want, and then do that. But a lot of companies don't do that.
Put on your HR cap for just a minute. And this is a question that I really wanted to ask you, because I feel like there's people that are extroverts. I'm one of those. There's people that are introverts. And what I learned, there's these different personalities, especially in the workplace. There's different, let's say, safety, just feeling psychologically safe in a virtual setting. And sometimes remote teams can feel invisible and you can kind of just, feel disconnected. But how do you create the psychological safety in a virtual setting?
So many of these things come back to the leader, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how good the leader is.
Right.
I think one of the things is in meetings, making sure that everybody gets some airtime. So you got those people that'll take up too much of the time, and then you've got people that won't speak up at all. So having a good facilitator to make sure that everybody is heard is important. And I think some of the other things that we talked about, just really, doing some activities to better understand each other, to know each other a little bit personally. With the psychological safety, when you know people better, at least most people, you tend to build that relationship and feel safer. The other thing is that the leader really needs to set the stage with sometimes being vulnerable in the group to say, I screwed up, or maybe I should have done this, or I need help with this, is going to set the stage for others being willing to put themselves out there. And then when somebody makes a mistake, not beating them up for it, but using it as a learning opportunity. Because most jobs are not rocket science. A mistake is not, the end of the world or anything. So just making sure that the team knows that that's the way that you view things, and showing that through your behavior. The other thing that I've seen with in-person teams and remote teams work well is having a team working agreement. So actually, as a team, brainstorming, these are the norms that we're going to use in interacting with one another. So it could be things like we're not going to gossip. If we have an issue with somebody, we're going to go to that person directly to have a conversation. So the team comes up with it, and then they use that to guide behavior and to hold one another accountable. Where I've seen that not work well is when they go through that activity and then never talk about it again. So it has to be something that is reinforced and used within the team. But I think that can be a really good strategy.
I do too. Let's build on that, and let's go into the hiring and onboarding and talent development for just a minute. When you help clients hire remote employees, what traits or skills matter most?
Yeah, with you mean for the employees that they're hiring?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I think communication is important. Of course, it's going to vary depending on the role, but communication, the ability to communicate, the ability to be more self-led, I think is important, because when you're working remote, you don't have somebody there all the time to tell you what to do. Being able to think critically is important. And then hiring for any role, making sure that that person aligns with your core values and using those as a lens for hiring is important. And not enough companies, from what I see, do that. And actually, a lot of small companies don't even have core values articulated. And that is what really guides your culture. So it's really important.
I agree. We actually have some of those on our wall in our office, which is
Yeah.
just nice, and have those around. So that's a big thing. I
Mhm.
definitely agree with that. The um, you know, we at Creative IT, we kind of specialize in helping remote teams onboard. We got for us, we have like an actual uh, portal where we can communicate with the companies that we're servicing from an IT perspective. But what does great remote onboarding look like from day one through week one through month one through year one?
Yeah, onboarding can really go badly remotely, because a lot of times you can just kind of leave somebody to fend for themselves. So, what I'm going to tell you are some of the guidelines for in person onboarding too. But with remote, I think you in particular need to have a structured plan. So I think, one of the things that I share with any type of onboarding is start before the person starts. So making sure that you have everything in place for them when they come into work on day one, that you are communicating with them if there's a lag, which there usually is between the offer and between when they start, that you provide really good instructions for the first day. They're going to be remote. They're not coming anywhere. You don't do parking and all those kind of things, but let them know what to expect because that's going to reduce their anxiety. Assigning a buddy, I think, is really important. So that would be a person that's not their manager, that is, just another person that's a peer, but that can help them navigate the culture. I think is a really good strategy because you
Oh,
don't want to ask your manager everything, and you're probably not going to because you don't want to look like you're dumb, right?
right,
So
right.
having that person to contact and having them help you navigate things is really helpful. But you don't want to assign them to negative Nancy. You want it to be a good employee that's going to help navigate them in a positive way. Having structured check-ins. So with in-person onboarding, I recommend that the manager have a sit-down meeting, two-way conversation, not just how are things going? Great. Okay. Um, Once a week. But I think with a remote person, I would do that even more often. Maybe even just a daily, doesn't have to be anything long, but a daily check-in and having a structured plan at least for the first few weeks. The other thing that I recommend, and the manager could do this, or if they have an HR person, they could do this, is a couple times at some point in the first 90 days and then at 90 days, doing what I call an entrance interview, which is just asking them some questions. Is this job what you expected? Do you have the tools and resources that you need to do your job? What suggestions do you have? Because oftentimes new employees come in and they see things you're doing that are just kind of dumb, but you don't, you're not paying attention. You're just used to doing it that way.
Yeah.
So they may have some really good suggestions for improvement, asking them what additional support or training they need. So really kind of expanding on that check-in to ask for their feedback and then acting on it where you can is going to help you head off some possible things that might cause them to leave.
I love the buddy system. I feel like every job that I've had, you latch on to somebody that is kind of
Mhm.
like-minded,
Yeah.
and you kind of make them your work buddy quick, right? And
Mhm.
a lot of times, luckily I've been in great jobs where people are really just there. They come and offer,
Mhm.
and
Right.
being a great colleague is something you can do for free. Uh,
Hmm. That's right.
Also, to add on to the onboarding, from an IT perspective, I often hear that, our companies, they really want, and think about it from an employee perspective, you want that equipment there on day
Mhm.
one, ready to
Yeah.
go, not shipped two weeks later, right?
Mhm.
The thing I find too is that people don't always know who manages what software or what program that they need to have loaded on their machines.
Oh yeah.
And so I find that that's a really big one that you need to get sorted out very quickly. And then that's kind of one of those things that we help take off as at Creative IT is we kind of just make sure we have this onboarding list of everything that needs to happen when someone's onboarded. And then we try to give time expectations when equipment's being ordered. And it goes back to internal communication and how important it is. We've got some companies that do it really well where they'll give us, hey, we got 3 or 4 employees coming here in about a month. And then we got some companies that are like, it's Friday and like, hey, they're going to be here Monday, you know? And
I've seen that many times.
We have no equipment in stock and we have to, remind them that these things have to be ordered or they are going to be shipment times. Sometimes they're all over the US. Sometimes maybe we have to procure in different companies. I know that there's a couple of companies I'm talking to right now that, are trying to figure out the best ways to procure equipment in different companies that may hire overseas, staff. So there's all these challenges when it comes to onboarding that I feel like, our company Creative IT is doing a great job at answering, but I love the buddy system. And that's actually the first time I've ever heard an entrance interview. I thought that was great. How do you keep them from, the leader saying, who said that, or you only have one person, but I think it's great because there may be some experience that individual has that could just drastically improve your processes coming in, and a lot of times there may be 1 or 2 nuggets that person can just add to the team initially right out of the gate. They can just take it to the next level. So why not make that intentional?
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things that I just wanted to say this before I forget it, because I thought it was a cool idea. For remote teams, a lot of times for in-person teams, I recommend that they take the new person out to lunch on the first day, preferably. But if you had a remote employee or remote team, you could actually do a team lunch where everybody gets online and you send the new person like a DoorDash so that their lunch is free on the first day, just to kind of, start building those relationships.
I love that. And we have DoorDash near Robert. If you're listening to this podcast, there is DoorDash near me. You can send me a DoorDash anytime you want. So we'll take that. But he does do lunches, so that's great. I do get dinners, steak dinners, especially when I sell a bunch. He'll give me a steak dinner.
Okay.
So. Now you've seen companies mess up onboarding and offboarding when IT and HR are not aligned. Why is that such a risk area?
With do you mean like if somebody comes and they haven't communicated with IT and don't have their equipment, and
yes,
that with leaving, they leave everything on. Okay, gotcha. So on the front end, if people don't have what they need to actually start working, it's going to be frustrating for them. Most people, I forget the statistics, but most people within the first week kind of make their decision as to whether this is going to be a place where I'm going to stay or not, or do I need to keep my options open? And I think definitely whether you are able to hit the ground running and have what you need is going to impact that. So I think it's very important to have a structured process in place when somebody's coming to contact IT, make sure they have the information. My husband works in IT and he complains about that quite a bit. On the offboarding side, there definitely needs to be a communication process as well so that people are cut off from systems, particularly if you are terminating somebody, that they're not leaving voluntarily and they might be able to hop on the system and do a whole lot of damage. You need to have that in place so that IT knows and is able to cut that access at the earliest possible time.
Love that you say that. I talk to a lot of business owners. We do audits. A lot of times I find that they have licenses from employees that were there 2 years prior.
It costs them money, I'll bet. I mean, I'm sure it does.
Yeah. It's still paying with them. And I think that that's a big, big opportunity to, organize yourself. And then also sometimes you have employees that they think, oh man, I'd really like to have that, client list, or man, I left some stuff in
Mhm.
my work, Google Drive. I need to get out of there. We have a
Mhm.
lot of people that will try to call and get back into their email after they've been terminated. And
Mhm.
that happens a lot. So there is a security side of those items as well. So that is something that our software takes care of at Creative IT. Get your processes down, even if they're on Excel, as long as and somewhere where everybody can see them, in leadership and that's taking care of that management. Make sure that it's put down on paper and you guys are following a process with that. I can't say that enough. For that, you can definitely see a difference in the companies who are organized in that fashion and not.
Mhm.
Then also it's just kind of it's a relief when everybody knows who does what and who's responsible for what, uh,
Mhm.
in the organization. Um, let's think about, as you were saying some of those items, where I was thinking about the person who just gets hired and, they just, they've never done remote work before. And it's like their office is like 5 feet from their bed. Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
How could leaders, this is kind of a weird question, but how can leaders support them, right? How do
Mhm.
you, from an HR perspective, say that you need to have some type of, boundaries, right?
Uh-huh.
What, don't put your off. I mean, if you have to, you have to, right? I know some people that especially in big cities,
Right. Yeah.
right?
If they live in a studio apartment and it's all right there, you don't have a lot of choice. But yeah, I think maybe providing them, especially if you know it's their first experience doing that, providing them with some tips and guidelines. And I've seen, most companies that have remote employees have some policies in their handbook around how that all operates.
As well as we have, like at Creative IT, we want you to have, still to have business attire, right?
Mhm.
Don't show up
Yeah.
in your
At
pajamas
least
to.
on the top.
Yeah, right, right, right. I know Mr. Wonderful wears, underwear or whatever, so just the shorts, but and that's all great, but he's business up top, right?
Mhm.
So I'm kind of the same way. I love my PJ pants, right? So
Yes.
that
Yeah.
definitely,
And as
definitely
long
rock.
as people don't see, it's
Right.
okay. But yeah, I oftentimes see policies about that. And most organizations have a dress code policy, and it would include that as well if they have remote employees.
Um, for this last, few minutes I got you, Leslie, I wanted to dive into, your career a little bit. And I want to start with your book. You wrote From Hot Mess to God's Best.
Uh-huh.
And I just love that title, by the way. And this, what led you to share your own story so publicly?
Uh-huh. Yeah, so clearly this was not a business book. I may be a hot mess some in my personal life or may have been in the past, but I'm not a hot mess consultant. So just want to make sure everybody knows that. So I just felt led to share my struggles to help others that may be going through similar things. So I started blogging, and it goes back maybe, it was probably a year or so before the pandemic. Started blogging, and from there, I started thinking, well, I've got enough content. I could probably just write a book. So I did. So I actually wrote two. The first was Confessions of a Hot Mess from Mess to Message, and it was more like a devotional. And then the second was a book, nonfiction book, From Hot Mess to God's Best. So I wrote those. I actually do have a business book also, The 7 Habits of High Retention Managers. So kind of the same concept. I've been doing leadership development classes, had a lot of content from blog posts and things like that. And I thought, I could write a book. It could kind of be like a workshop in a book. So I did. It wasn't quite as easy, and I should have known better, as I thought it would be. But that came out in 2023. I use it more as kind of a tool for speaking and training and things like that. I didn't really have a big initiative to go out and sell a bunch of copies and be a bestseller or anything like that. But anyhow, I like to write. They were all three pre-AI. It probably would have been a lot better. There had been some AI.
It's probably better for it that it wasn't.
Yeah.
With all this noise, AI noise.
That's right. That's right. There's still some M dashes in there because I like those before they were a thing on AI.
Right. Now, I love this title, Badass HR Hub. You recently launched that. What is it? Who is it for? And why'd you create it?
Okay. Well, I had actually listened to some podcasts and done some research into communities, which are kind of becoming, I mean, I guess it's been around a while. I had never really been a part of a community, but it's kind of like, if you're not familiar, it's kind of like a Facebook group where people are interacting, but feels a little more inclusive. So you're able to actually go out, post a prompt, have people have discussion. You can put some things, resources and tools and training and things like that. You have a calendar where you can have events and go live, things like that. So I actually launched it in October. It is geared towards HR departments of one, few, or none. So, you have your under-resourced HR departments that are trying to do it all. And then you also have some people that are business owners that don't have HR because they're doing it themselves. Or perhaps there's somebody in a business, like oftentimes it's a CFO, a controller, or an office manager that gets HR duties on top of their own duties and may not have a lot of bandwidth or really expertise in some of the things that you need to know. So it's geared towards that population to actually provide them with a forum to ask questions, share information, because it also can be kind of lonely, and, increase their knowledge, frankly, by doing some of the training and participating in the events. So I did an initial open it up kind of thing for about 2 weeks. I think I have about 70 people that are part of the community. Wish I could say that they were all active, but they're not. But it was kind of my trial run. So it was free initially. My intention down the road is to make it more of a paid membership and really build some good value that people get as being part of the community. But right now it is free. I'm going to open it up again in January for more people to enter. So if you fit those categories and you're interested, be on the lookout. I post a lot on LinkedIn. I also have a email list that goes out every week that provides tools, tips, free resources at times. So, sign up for that if you have any interest.
Love that. I oftentimes hear, business owners ask, when should I hire an IT company? Mm-hmm. And so, when should people hire an HR specialist?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you have, really they say employee handbook, kind of a foundational thing, right? If your company has really more than one employee, you should probably have that just to kind of drive how things are going to go. But you probably don't need a full-time HR person until you're 50 employees or above, quite frankly. Some of that depends on your company, the amount of activity that person may have. So if it's manufacturing and you need somebody to help with recruiting, you're probably going to need an HR person. But if it's professional services, you probably don't until you kind of get up in numbers. But, the thing that I do that's becoming much more common is fractional. It has been common in the CFO space for a while. And what it means is having a part-time flexible person that you can call on to kind of help you build the structure and help you, kind of develop strategy and figure out how you're going to handle all things HR as you move forward with your business. So I have some clients where I do that on a regular basis. There's a consistent amount of hours that I work for them per month. And there's some, some of the smaller ones, it's hard to predict kind of what their needs will be. So it's more based on kind of an hourly type thing.
Love it. Love the fact that there's definitely a market for what you're offering. I know that there's times where some of the small businesses, man, we really need an HR person in here. We need some guidance, right?
Yes.
So
what I find a lot of times is it's when something breaks or they get a charge or they just can't take it anymore because they have so much drama and people issues that they call somebody in instead of doing it more proactively to head off some of those problems.
Right. So do yourself a favor, try to take the hat off, get with somebody who's done it, been there, done that, especially in HR and IT. I feel like those are such foundational elements to any business, and you're wearing too many hats. Take some of those off. I've never heard a business owner that said, I wish I wouldn't have taken those hats off. I wish I wouldn't have delegated that work. Unless there was some internal delegated work that just got totally messed up. But majority of the time, it's game changer for the owners that are trying to get their business off the ground.
It is, and it's necessary if you want to scale your business. I mean, I know I have struggled with that myself. When do I start getting some help and freeing myself up to really grow my business? And I'm kind of at an inflection point and finally getting a virtual assistant and some of those things in place. It's the same thing with a business owner. If you are down, what is it they say, working in the business instead of working on the business, if you're mired in the day-to-day trying to handle HR, IT, all the things, you're not going to be in a position where you can really focus on being strategic and growing your business.
Couldn't agree more. Final question that I always like to ask all of my individuals that come on our podcast is just, how did you get here? And is there somebody along your journey since you were younger that was just a big inspiration to you in your journey? And a follow-up question to that would be, is just, when you were younger, did you feel like that, at what point did you know you're going to be in HR and kind of go down that career path? Or is it, how'd you get there? And was there any indicators early that, man, I'd really like to do HR. I'm a people person,
Yeah. Well, I am so old that when I first got kind of into the HR field, it was transitioning from the term personnel. So there weren't a lot of people that were getting into that, really. It was more like you were in an organization and people might be shifted into those roles, but it was becoming more of a well-defined field. And I think people saw that there was a need. So the way that I got into it, I wish I had a better story, but I was in college. I studied psychology, and we all know that it's hard to get a job when you have a bachelor's degree in psychology. My intention at that time was to get my doctorate in psychology and be a clinical psychologist, but it was very competitive to get into those doctoral programs. I went to school at Appalachian State, and I learned of a program called Industrial Organizational Psychology that was a master's program. And I thought, well, I like the idea of working in business, but I'm fascinated by people. So that would be a good way to kind of marry those two things together. So I ended up getting my master's in industrial organizational psychology and got into HR from the beginning of my career. Started out as an HR administrator, and just over my 30-some year career, I've worked in a lot of different industries, which serves me well now and in different capacities. So the person I would say that inspired me early on, when I was in grad school, I had an internship with an HR consulting firm. It was called Lead Associates out of Greensboro. And the guy that led the firm just was very supportive. He did all he could to educate me in different areas. And again, it was kind of an evolving field. But that was when I decided, later in my career, it would be really cool to be a consultant. So I always kind of had that in the back of my mind. And frankly, I just got really tired of all the corporate stuff. And 3 years ago, just decided that I was going to give it a try, go out on my own. So that's how that happened. But, I've reflected back on whether I would do HR again if I had it to do over again. And I really think that I have picked the right career for myself. Just when I look at my skill set and strengths and those areas where I'm not as strong, um, you think it's been a really good fit for me. And I don't know that I would do anything different.
And there's a lot of people that can't say that. And I know that I was one of those that
Mhm.
changed my major so many times in college. And,
Yeah. Oh, it's so hard to figure out what you want to do, right? I mean, I still have a daughter that hasn't figured it out, and she's 30. So
yeah. You always get asked, what are you going to be when you grow up? And
yeah, exactly. And I've tried to help because I got all the assessments and all the tools and stuff, but she doesn't want me to be involved. So anyway.
Well, I think it's kind of funny that, that they have eventually they'll realize what kind of resource they have right
Yeah,
there.
maybe. Thought by now.
Well, Leslie, this has been great. I really appreciate your time and appreciate having you on. And what I like to do is, have you on again and just see how things are going next year. See what next book you write. See where Badass HR Hub is at, and I want everybody to know who you are and where they can find you online and learn more about your work.
Okay. Well, again, it's Leslie Speas, Influence HR Consulting. And the website is www.influencehrconsulting.com. You can go there to figure out how you can follow me with my newsletter, and also follow me on LinkedIn. I post quite a bit out there. Would love to connect with you. And I think you gave me an idea for my next book, which might be How to Be a Badass HR Professional.
Love that. I'll pick it up for sure.
All right.
And if you're running a remote first or hybrid company, and if you're tired of duct taping IT and security and onboarding and device logistics together, Creative IT helps teams just like yours build a real infrastructure for remote work. Also, same goes for HR. If you need that and you're trying to scale up your business, give Leslie a call. Thanks for listening to Remote First Innovators. Share this episode with another founder or leader navigating remote culture, and hit follow us so you never miss an episode. We'll see you in the next one.
Remote First Innovators podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.